Hello and welcome to my specialization introduction and outdoor content guide for the Disciplined Priest in World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth. If you haven't watched the primer video for this series, I recommend that you do that now. There'll be a link in the description below, and that will get you up to speed on what exactly it is we're doing in these videos. So we are here on our Disciplined Priest. I'm going to fumble over that all day. We're here on our Disciplined Priest. And we've got our action bars up and empty. If we go into our talent tree, these are the talents you can select to fulfill the requirements laid out in the primer video. And now that we've got that all set up, we're going to hop into our spell book. And before we start organizing our spells, I want to make it very clear that this is not a dungeon or raid healing guide. This is a guide for how to play this specialization out in the open world if you're questing and leveling. So as such, we're going to be ignoring a lot of rather important skills for dungeon healing, raid healing, and focusing on ways that we can improve our damage and mobility and things that are really going to help us out in the open world. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Know what this video is for, and we'll come back around to healing and tanking later on. So we're going to get in and sort out our spells. I'm not going to give a really in-depth guide to each one of these spells, but I will give a brief description of what the spell does. That way you can know what it does and understand why it's going in the category that it is. First off, we have Desperate Prayer. This is a defensive cooldown. It will increase maximum health by 25% and heal you for that amount. We have Dispel Magic. This is a combat utility ability. We're probably not going to use it very often, but it will dispel a beneficial magic effect from an enemy target. We have Fade. This is a combat utility ability. We're also probably not going to use very much. It will remove all threat that you have for 10 seconds. Holy Nova, part of our core rotation. Leap of Faith. This is an interesting one. You can choose to put it, in your combat utility, or you can put it off to the side. I'm going to put it off under miscellaneous because this will pull the spirit of a target, party, or raid member to you. And if you're playing solo, this is absolutely useless. It doesn't even have applications to yourself, but if you are questing or leveling or farming with a friend, then I would put that over here in combat utility because that'll help you, kind of help them have a little more mobility as well. Levitate. This one you can put over in miscellaneous if you want. I like to put it in combat utility because I'm using it all the time. Basically, it will levitate you or a party or raid member for 10 minutes, and you'll float a few feet above the ground. You'll also get slow fall if you jump off something, and you can float over water. So I use this all the time because I'll just run and jump off a cliff, wait till I get close to the ground, hit levitate, and I take no fall damage. So I like to put it over here, but you could put it over in your miscellaneous section if you wanted to. Next we have Mass Dispel. This is another combat utility that we're probably not going to use very often. It removes harmful magic effects from 5 friendly targets and a beneficial magic effect from 5 enemy targets. It's just a nice big, hey, I'm getting rid of debuffs on my friends and buffs on my enemies, but we won't use that very often in outdoor content. Next we have Mass Resurrection. This will go in our miscellaneous section. It brings all party members back to life, but you can't use it in combat. Then we have Mind Control. This is a crowd control ability. It will let you take control of a target that's up to 1 level higher than your level. You could put that down here if you're going to use it a lot. Otherwise, you can put it over in your miscellaneous section because a lot of times you're going to want to set that up before combat or right at the start of combat. It really just depends on you how much you want to depend on mind control. I personally don't use it a lot, so I'll put it over here. Next we have Mind Vision. That goes in our miscellaneous section. It allows you to see through the eyes of a target. So something kind of fun you can do when you're out of combat. Then we have Pain Suppression. This is a defensive cooldown. It will reduce all damage taken by a friendly target by 40%. Penance is part of our core rotation. Shadow Word Barrier is a defensive cooldown. Summons barriers to protect all your allies. Power word Fortitude, we're going to put that over here in our combat utility. This is a buff that we put on ourselves, so we'll go ahead and do that. It will increase our stamina by 10% for 1 hour. Also, you can use this to buff your party and raid members as well. So we'll put it down here because we really don't need to use it that often. This buff should last every hour, but we want it to be right there in front of our face, kind of going, hey, do you have me up? So that's why we put it kind of down here. Next, we have Power Word Radiance. This is a combat utility ability. It does a quick burst heal to a target and allies within 30 yards. And then it will apply your class specialization specialty to that, which we'll talk about later. Power Word Shield is part of our core rotation. Psychic Scream is a crowd control ability that causes enemies within 8 yards to flee. Purify is another combat utility ability we're probably not going to use very often. It removes harmful effects from the target. Rapture is a offensive cooldown. For the next 10 seconds, our Power Word Shield, which is part of our core rotation, will absorb a lot more damage. Resurrection, this is our single target resurrection spell that we can use out of combat, so that goes in our miscellaneous section. Shackle Undead is a crowd control ability. It only works against undead enemies, but it works for 50 seconds and it prevents all actions and movements. Damage will cancel the effect. Shadow Mend, this is a combat utility ability that we can cast on ourselves or an ally. It heals for a significant amount, but after you cast this on the target, they will take some shadow damage every second until they take in a certain amount or until they leave combat. So it's really good as like a heal right after you're done fighting. If you want to top yourself off, you can cast Shadow Mend. You'll get the nice heal. You'll be out of combat, so the downside isn't there. But it is still a pretty strong heal if you need to use it in combat as well. Shadow Word Pain is part of our core rotation. Shadow Fiend is a offensive cooldown. It summons a Shadow Fiend to fight for us. Smite is part of our core rotation. And that brings us to the end of our active spells that we have as the Disciplined Priest. So let's talk about the resource available to the Disciplined Priest. The Disciplined Priest has one resource. It's called Mana. You start with a combat with a certain amount of mana equal to your intellect. You spend that mana to use your abilities. And honestly, it's really hard to run out of mana in the open world. So a lot of times the mana doesn't even really affect you as a resource for the most part. But you're more so kind of limited by the cooldowns of your abilities and the global cooldown. So before we get in and start talking about the core rotation of the Disciplined Priest, we need to talk about some of the passives available. Now, the Disciplined Priest is a healing specialization, so a lot of the passives and abilities are oriented towards that. So we kind of have to glean what we can from that in order to apply it to just being out there playing content solo. So first up, we have Atonement. Power Word Shield, Shadow Mend, and Power Word Radiance apply Atonement to your target for 15 seconds. Your spell damage heals all targets affected by Atonement for 60% of the damage done. So what does this mean for us in the open world? It means that as we're going through and we are playing, we're going to be casting heals and things like that on ourselves. These abilities can apply Atonement to us, and then as we damage the target, we heal ourselves. So we kind of have some built-in self-healing while we're damaging, as long as we put the right abilities, or cast the right abilities on ourselves. Next, we have Focused Will. Melee attacks against you cause you to gain Focused Will, reducing damage you take by 15% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 2 times. So we also have some baked-in damage reduction there against melee attacks. Our Mastery is Grace. Your healing and absorption is increased on your targets that have Atonement. And then finally, Power of the Dark Side. Shadow Word Pain, which is one of our core rotation abilities, has a chance to empower your next Penance, which is also one of our core abilities, with Shadow, increasing its effectiveness by 50%. So, it ain't all bad as far as being out in the open world goes. We'll take a closer look at Dark Side after we cover the core rotation, but for now, just know that some of our abilities will give us that atonement, and then we have a little bit of self-healing baked into that. So, let's take a look at the core rotation. For the Disciplined Priest, we've got 5 abilities here. Like I said, we use mana, so there's no weird kind of, build up a resource, spend it system here. We're just straight using our abilities. So the real meat of our class in the open world is this ability here called Penance. It takes 400 mana, it's a channeled ability, has a 9-second cooldown. It will launch a volley of holy light at the target, causing a good amount of damage to an enemy, or if you cast it on an ally, it will heal the target. Now, just to be clear, you can cast Penance on yourself, it just looks a little weird. But that is where the biggest chunk of our damage is going to come from, is being able to cast that Penance ability. But then we do have a couple of other tools as well. So when we start combat, we're going to want to put Shadow Word Pain on the target. Shadow Word Pain is a damage over time debuff ability. It does a little bit of damage, and then it does a good amount of damage over 16 seconds. So we put that on the target. They start taking damage from that. Then we can hit them with our Penance and get a nice chunk of damage from that. Then we have 2 options. We can either start casting Smite if we're fighting against a single target. So Smite will deal an okay amount of damage to the target, but then it will also absorb damage dealt by the enemy as well. So it's all about dealing damage, absorbing damage, dealing damage, healing damage. That's kind of the theme of the Disciplined Priest. Then, if we're fighting a bunch of enemies, we can cast Holy Nova. This takes 320 mana, and it deals a small amount of damage to all enemies within 12 yards, and also heals all allies within 12 yards. And finally, the last ability we have that is part of our core rotation that you can cast this whenever it makes sense. If you're fighting some melee enemies, you're going to want to cast it right away. Like put Shadow Word Pain on everything, cast Power Word Shield, and then go into whatever abilities you're going to use after that. If you're fighting some ranged characters, maybe it's not a big deal. But Power Word Shield will shield an ally for 15 seconds, absorbing a good chunk of damage and preventing damage from delaying your spell casting. And this is where we get our atonement from. We're going to be casting Power Word Shield on ourselves in most fights, which will give us atonement, which will allow us to heal some of the damage being dealt to us. On top of the fact that we have a shield, and we've got some of these other abilities that are healing us while we're dealing damage as well. And then that brings us kind of back to Power of the Dark Side here. Shadow Word Pain, which is that ability we're putting on our targets at the beginning of the fight, has a chance to empower Penance, which is that big, meaty ability that we have to use. With Shadow, increasing its effectiveness by 50%, meaning that either it will deal 50% extra damage to whatever enemy you're fighting, or it will heal 50% extra damage on whatever ally you are healing. And that is pretty much it. That is the base rotation for open world content on a Disciplined Priest. So let's go down and take a look at it. So we're going to go up to our target here, and we will Shadow Word Pain. If we wanted to, we could go ahead and cast our Power Word Shield. And then Penance, that's our big meaty ability. You see we get 3 big bolts off that. And then we would start casting our Smite while we're waiting for Penance to come off cooldown. When our Shadow Word Pain is about to expire, we want to make sure we put it back up. So Shadow Word Pain, we can put our shield up. We do Penance, and then go right into Smite while we're waiting. At this point, we're either waiting for Penance to come off cooldown, or we're waiting to refresh our Shadow Word Pain. If we're in a situation where we're fighting a couple of enemies, then we can do a little bit of what's called multi-dotting, which is where you put your damage over time abilities on several different characters. So in this scenario, what I would do is I would open up by trying to put Shadow Word Pain on both targets that I'm fighting, put up my shield because I know I'm going to get attacked by multiple enemies, throw penance on one of the targets, and then just start using Holy Nova to deal damage. If I need to recast my shield, I'll do that. This graphic here lets us know that we've got that Power of the Dark Side, and our next penance will deal that increased damage or healing. So we want to make sure to use penance when we have that up. And that's it. That's all there is to it. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. So the next thing to do is get into our talents and see if we can do anything to give us some more options, make this a little more interesting, a little more powerful out in the open world. So we're going to set up a talent build that works well in the open world. Okay, this is the build that I recommend you use for open world content. It's not the only build that you can use, but it's the one I recommend, and will be showing off at the end of this video. We're going to go through each of the talents, talk about what they do and why we have chosen them for the build. And let's start with Castigation. So Castigation is pretty simple. Penance fires one additional bolt of holy light over its duration. This effectively increases the damage of Penance by 25%, because each bolt does about 500 or so damage with the gear that I have equipped right now. So instead of doing around 1,500, we're now doing around 2,000 with Penance. And like I said, that's the meat, that's the bread and butter of the damage that you're going to do. So increasing the damage on that ability is really nice. Next, we have Body and Soul. This is kind of like your movement tier. Body and Soul will make your Power Word Shield and Leap of Faith, which is this ability I put over here, increase your target's movement speed by 40% for 6 seconds, and this can only occur for 3 seconds, and that can only occur once every 6 seconds. So now anytime you cast Power Word Shield on yourself, you get a nice little speed boost for 3 seconds. And because Power Word Shield has no cooldown and only costs 500 mana, you can kind of use this every 6 seconds to give yourself a little burst of speed. That way you can travel around a little bit faster. Alright, so that's what that talent's for, a little increased mobility. We don't have a lot of mobility as a priest, so this definitely helps us be a little bit more flexible. A lot of people do like Angelic Feather, and you can choose to take that as well if you want. This is an instant cast ability with 3 charges. It puts a feather down on the ground. When you run through it, you get 40% movement speed for 5 seconds. So it is another ability that you can use. I prefer Body and Soul just because Power Word Shield, even though it can only happen every 6 seconds, Power Word Shield has no cooldown, costs 500 mana, so, I'm never worried about, do I have a charge of Angelic Feather? Plus, you're just going to be casting Power Word Shield on yourself a lot anyway, and so that increased movement speed can help you to, kite an enemy around and attack them without them being able to attack you as well. Next, we have Power Word Solace. So this is an 11-second cooldown, so a little long, but not crazy long. It strikes the enemy with heavenly power, dealing a pretty good amount of damage and restoring 1% of your maximum mana. Now, we're really taking this purely for the fact that it gives us another button we can hit in order to deal some damage to the enemy, which is always good because, as you can see, we're kind of limited here. So having that extra, little chunky Power Word Solace there, gives us that little bit more damage to kill things that little bit more faster. Or a little bit faster, not more faster. Next, we have Shining Force. This is the crowd control kind of ability tier. Shining Force is a crowd control ability, 45-second cooldown. It creates a burst of light around a friendly target, so you can cast it on yourself or someone else. It knocks away nearby enemies and slows their movement speed by 70%. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're getting overwhelmed, a bunch of enemies are attacking you, you can hit Shining Force and knock them back and slow their movement speed for 3 seconds, so you have some time to kind of gather yourself and get back into the fight. Next, we have Sins of the Many. Your damage is increased by up to 12%, diminishing for each ally affected by your atonement. So what this means is that basically if we're out there by ourselves questing, we just get 12% increased damage. That's great. Purge the Wicked. So this replaces our Shadow Word Pain. So that was the ability we were casting at the beginning of combat to put that damage over time onto people. So now, this ability cleanses the target with fire, causing a little more damage than Shadow Word Pain did initially, and a lot more damage over 20 seconds. And it will spread to an additional nearby enemy when you cast Penance on the target. So what this means is that now we can cast Purge the Wicked on one target. In that situation where I was saying you could do the multi-dotting, instead you put Purge the Wicked on your main target, you cast Penance on that target, and it automatically will spread to all enemies around. So you kind of get a passive multi-dotting effect, which is really going to increase the effectiveness of your abilities and your rotation and the flow of it. And then finally, Lenience. Atonement reduces damage taken by 3%. And this is simply here because, we're going to have Atonement from casting Power Word Shield on ourselves while we're fighting. So this just gives us a nice 3% damage reduction. So let's go down and take a look at the rotation and how it changes a little bit. So now if we're fighting a single target, we're still going to open up with our Purge the Wicked now. That's going to put the damage over time ability on them. Cast your shield if you want to cast your shield if you think it's appropriate. We're going to go Penance. We're going to hit Power Word Solace for that extra damage, and then go into casting our smites. And then if our Purge the Wicked is coming off cooldown, we'll reset that. As soon as Penance is off cooldown, we'll cast that again. We'll cast our Power Word Solace, and then start going back into our smite. Okay. Alright, so in a multi-target situation, what we're going to do is we're going to, and I think that, let's see, we'll have to see if it actually spreads, but we'll cast Purge the Wicked. We will throw up our shield if we need it. We'll cast Penance. And if the targets are close enough, that'll spread the Purge the Wicked over to the other target. And then we will cast Power Word Solace on our main target, and then start hitting our Holy Nova. And that's all there is to it. So we've got a little bit better selection of tools that we can use now. We went from our regular old 5 abilities to 6, and in addition we got a little bit more versatility out of our damage over time ability, as well as some more damage from our penance, plus some passive damage reduction, and that's it. That's the build. That's what I recommend that you use. The next thing is to talk about the PvP talents if you want to toggle on War Mode and mainly focus on PvE content. First off, I recommend you take Relentless. This will replace your Honorable Medallion. It gives you a 20% reduction in the duration of any crowd control effects on you, so a nice passive set it forget it talent. Next, we have Trinity. The duration of your atonement is increased by 15 seconds, and the healing transferred through atonement is increased by 20%. However, atonement can now only affect a maximum of 3 targets and can only be applied through Power Word Shield. Well, that all sounds fine to us. So our atonement lasts longer, so all the benefits we get from atonement are going to be there longer. We get increased healing from it, which is good. And then also, maximum of 3 targets, we're mainly just casting it on ourselves, so that's fine. And we're generally only putting it on ourselves with Power Word Shield anyway, so the fact that that's the only way you can apply it with this talent is fine. So it just kind of makes our atonement better in the solo kind of questing and farming situation. Next, we have Strength of Soul. Your Power Word Shield reduces all physical damage taken by 15% while the shield persists. So just even more damage reduction. Finally, Searing Light. The damage of your Smite, which is our single target spam ability here, is increased by 15%. And when you deal damage with Smite, the cooldown of your Penance is reduced by 1 second. Now remember, for single target, we're going Purge the Wicked, Penance, into Smite, and we're just spamming Smite until Penance comes off cooldown. So if we're doing that anyway, then Searing Light will make it so that we can cast Penance a lot more often. So for the most part, they're kind of defensive because, you know, they're PvP oriented on a healer specialization, so it's kind of hard to find some offensive talents in there. But these are the ones that I'd recommend you take if you are going to go out there, turn on War Mode, and still mainly focus on your PvE content. Okay, so that's it. The next thing is to take the build out into the open world and show it off. So I'm going to cut to that, and I'll see you there. Alright, so we're here in Surmar City, and we're going to fly down and try out the build against a few different enemies and just see how it plays. So let's get down here. And remember, we're going to want to open up with our Purge the Wicked. We can put our shield on. This is a melee guy. He's going to come attack us. We'll cast our Penance, and he's dead. So a lot of times, and we can recast our Power Word Shield for a little movement speed buff here. So we'll just repeat this process. We're going to Purge the Wicked. We'll hit our Penance, and we're good. Okay, so let's see if we can do a little bit. Let's see if we can get our Purge the Wicked to hit a bunch of targets here. Okay, so we're going to cast Purge the Wicked and then Penance. Alright, and you can see that it is spreading. We can make sure our shield is back up. Use our Power Word Solace. In this scenario, we've got our Holy Nova. Now, as you can see, Holy Nova doesn't do a whole ton of damage, so you can use it if one of your targets is low and you just kind of want to take them out while you're focused on a different target. But for the most part, what I would recommend you do in a multi-target situation is get your Purge the Wicked out there. Make sure your shield's up. Get your Penance on cooldown right away so you can start dealing damage. Use your Power Word Solace, get that on cooldown too, and then just start smiting the target you really want to get rid of. Hey. Alright, so we're going to do the same thing here. We got this guy. We're going to Power Word, or Purge the Wicked. We're going to cast our Penance. That's going to spread it over to this guy. Make sure our shield is up. Use our Power Word Solace, and then start casting Smite until he's dead. Okay. So we're going to go through. We're going to try to grab up a couple of different enemies here. We'll see if our friend over there is going to help us or not. Alright. Make sure our shield stays up. Use our Power Word Solace. We can summon our Shadow Fiend to help us out here. We do have our Holy Nova. You can definitely spam this, but if you look at it, like, the enemies aren't taking a whole lot of damage. Oh, there we go. We got some extras in here. Hey, we got a little help from our friends. Alright. Well, even with the little bit of help there on the tail end, you could see that we really weren't struggling too much, and a lot of that comes down to the fact that we have the Power Word Shield, we've got the Atonement damage reduction, we've got the healing from Atonement as well. So all in all, it just makes for a really good build that is able to withstand a lot of damage. It may not kill things the absolute fastest, but it still does a pretty good job. So let's see if we can fly over here. Yeah, we got this rare spawn here. We'll take them out. So here I could probably just spam Holy Nova until these guys are dead. But as you can see, it doesn't do a whole lot of damage. But it also doesn't really take any of our mana. So, you know, like, it doesn't hurt to spam it. Let's go ahead and get rid of this one. You see we got our proc there, making our Penance deal more damage. So we could cast our Shadow Mend on ourselves. This is going to give us a big heal And you'll see that we don't have the debuff from Shadow Min because we're not in combat. So it's a great way to top yourself off in between fights. So we did use our Shadow Fiend in that last attack, or that last setting. That was just to help us pump out more damage. We weren't really in danger of dying. It was mostly just to help us kill things faster since we did have a target with a lot of health. That's kind of how I'd recommend that you use Shadow Fiend. As you get used to this core rotation, you can start to incorporate some of your other abilities, your defensives, you know, take on more and more enemies because you just do have the survivability to do that. We're going to go ahead and take on this rare spawn here. So we did our Purge the Wicked into Penance, into our Shield and our Power Word Solace. Now we just spam Smite. Penance is off cooldown, so we're going to hit that again. And you can see this guy is hitting us and we are taking no damage. And that's largely because of all of our Atonement, our Shields, our self-healing. Don't forget that our Smite not only deals damage, but it gives us a buff that will absorb damage as well. So Smite deals about 1,000 damage and absorbs almost 800 damage, the next 800 damage dealt by the enemy. So just a lot of survivability, and your damage doesn't really suffer too much. I mean, you're not killing things as fast as a actual damage specialization would, but it's still pretty fast, you know, and the trade-off is you get a ton of survivability. So I hope this helps you to understand the Discipline Priest a little bit better, gives you the confidence to get on your own Discipline Priest, get out there in the open world, try out the specializations, see if it's something you'd want to play in Battle for Azeroth. If you like the video, give me a like, all that kind of stuff. Help encourage me to keep making these types of videos. And either way, I hope you have a lot of fun in Battle for Azeroth, and thank you for watching.